Hi, my name's Tom, and I have noticed some patterns in the way that products are designed. And I think there's an awful lot of waste, an awful lot of rework, an awful lot of stuff where things become incoherent and we end up with lots and lots of battles over details because we haven't understood the coherent core of what we're building well enough. And we're trying to and I think there's a real resonance with an idea from fiction writing, which links in with an idea of what are the layers of product, a digital product software in the first place. And then there's a way we can translate these ideas from fiction writing back into the world of design and product work. And I'm going to share a little sketch of how those layers that we're going to get to might work. And there's a little clue for where we're going to go when we look on the screen here at the image of a snowflake fractal being built. This is a mathematical construct where you start with a triangle and then you add triangles to each face with every iteration. So it's an iterative process that makes an ever more complex shape. One thing that is interesting with a snowflake fractal, interesting, depends on whether you're into sort of nerdy maths or not. It has a finite area, but an infinite circumference because the circumference of the fractal is infinitely detailed. Um, so yeah, this is where it's useful, I think, for design. In this is a little hint ahead in that we're going to start with the simplest building blocks and we're going to iteratively make it more and more wrinkly, more and more detailed as we go through it. And this is something you can do not just as a designer, but with your entire team, your entire organization, in order to understand what it is that we're actually working on together, that we're shaping together. It enables us to start from a core skeleton, see how that's going to affect things, and it enables us to keep going back and iterating on that skeleton. That's a little hint of what's coming ahead. But let's get into a little bit of intro. So, first, this is something I've borrowed from a physicist and a writer. So, if you're interested in knowing more about how this works in a fiction writing sense, the link at the bottom of this screen is your friend, advancedfictionwriting.com, Bosch, or you can just search for Snowflake Method, the first thing that will pop up on Google. The other thing that this is related to is a piece of work from a colleague, an ex-colleague of mine, good friend Jamie Mill. He made this version of Jesse James Garrett's elements of product design, which for me really explains a lot about where the struggle is with a lot of teams who are working on design. I think that this is best explained by saying the surface layer is the Figma screens and the product that everyone can see. And often that's as far as we see because it's all there on the surface. And we have our preferences and our tastes and our assumptions then about what's going on underneath. And when we're only considering that surface, when we're only able to see that surface level, when we only work on that surface level, a lot of this stuff gets hidden and assumed. And a lot of the time, what we find we're doing is different people on the team, different and your users versus the people inside the company are working on fundamentally different underlying layers. They have a different idea about what this product and service strategy layer should be, which then leads to different ideas about what the conceptual model should be. How should this thing even fit together in the first place? And because we've got different ideas about what that is, we end up debating things at the surface layer where we actually can't agree on the right choice because we're fundamentally trying to do different things underneath. And so one of the things, one of the practices that I have found most powerful in the last 5 or 6 years of my career working with multiple teams is to find ways to expose these lower levels. And the Snowflake method, that's one way that we can expose those lower levels and tie them into those higher levels and really link everything together. So you've got something that's coherent with reality rather than is sort of pulling itself apart and competing. So going back to the fiction writing example, one of the fundamental insights that I think this guy, Randy Ingermanson, had is that classically, there's a couple of really common ways that people write novels, the pantser and the plotter. Now, the pantser, that's referring to flying by the seat of your pants. And this is, I think Stephen King is a good example of this. What he will do to write a novel is create some characters in his head. He'll imagine some characters who have motivations and needs, etc., etc., and he'll put them in a room together and kind of see what happens. He'll put them in a situation, and then the characters start doing things, and he writes down what they do over time. And this is flying by the seats of the pants. The plot evolves as he tells the story. Now, that means that he starts at the beginning and he writes a long story. And at the end, if it's not great, he's written a great long story. It might be great or not great, but in order to rework it, if there's some sort of major problem in the plot or something doesn't make sense or it's not really working, you've got to rewrite the entire thing from scratch. Contrasting that, the other classic is one of the things that's good with the Pantser is that I'll just go back. Yeah, one of the things that's really good with the Panzer's method is that the characters remain character driven. You're going to believe them. You get to know these characters because they're always behaving in ways that make sense for them as a character, and that's really nice to see. One of the challenges is what if your characters do things that aren't interesting? I've definitely heard from someone who tried this and said, well, their character just stayed in a room chatting, nothing happened. And I think it is not necessarily the case that it's going to work for everyone. Um, on the flip side, there's the plotter. So the plotter is someone who plans out the plot and puts all the puzzle pieces together in bullet point form first. So they know where their characters need to get to. They understand the arc of the structure of the narrative, and they have certain beats they want to hit. That can really work for like a page turner type thing because you know all the puzzle pieces you want to put in place. Where that starts to fall down is sometimes, quite often, in a plot-driven novel, the characters end up doing things that are out of character, and you find you don't understand why people are doing those things, and they're doing them because the plot needs them to do it, not because they, as a character, necessarily want to do it. It doesn't always happen in each of these cases, but that is kind of the canonical extremes. Now, Randy Ingermanson, he says in his original article and in the book about the Snowflake Method, there is no right way to write a novel, just as there's no right way to design digital products or make products happen. There are there are infinite ways. However, some ways are easier and some ways are harder. And what's easier and harder for you will depend on your unique context. What's the situation you're working in? What's the size of company? What are you used to doing? What are the practices you've got in place already? So, what I'm going to share now is my twist on the Snowflake method, which is used for writing fiction, but brought back into software design. Because that's the irony here is that Randy Ingermanson stole the idea for the Snowflake method for writing fiction from the way that he worked on software. But I think it's a practice that you don't see that much in software these days. And I want to bring it back into that world. Okay, so one more model now to share. This is the way that I think about the classic risks of product design and product launching. And what I'm going to do is draw a nice big fat line down the middle here. And on one side, we're going to have the business. And on the other side, we're going to have the market. So this is like the wall between our business and the market. That's often quite thick. We're going to divide up what's happening inside each of these into a kind of visible area and an invisible area. There's two aspects to any product. One is distribution and the other is solution. So we could break each of these down further, but we're seeing these two sides there and these two sides there. This gives us four quadrants that we might want to deal with, but fundamentally two are like internal concerns and two are more external concerns. But it's our job as product designers to manage each of these. And so one over here, the classic, the market and distribution, that's all about, let's go, desirability. Then the solution side of that, that's about usability, which I combine into do people understand it and can they get through it? Like, does that work? Meanwhile, inside of the business, we're worried about in the solution side, that is more about feasibility. Is this something we can do with the time and resources we have available? And then in the distribution side, for the business, we're worried about viability. Or the big question there is it worth it for us to do it? So over on the market side, I think the major questions you're asking here, when we come to desirability, we're wondering, is this something we want enough to pay the price? When we come to usability, we're wondering, is this something we get? Do we understand it? When we come to feasibility, it's, can we do this? Is it possible for us to do? And when we come to viability, we're wondering, is it worth it for us to do? Is this something that is worth us maintaining over time? Because the cost of software, the cost of a digital product is not only the cost to make it, it's the cost to maintain it, to support it over time, to keep up all of the marketing. Like there's the total cost of ownership is a concept that we might not think about. So there's the whole model. What I'm going to do now is add on a little point where I think what we're trying to do when we're designing a new product or a product that works is the business is making a promise to the market. So here, going this way, there is a promise. And the promise needs to be something that the market desires. They get it, they want it, and they need to want it enough. And so what we then get is the loop that comes around here where the market is willing to pay. And the market is going to pay for something that they understand and can use and exists well enough to get money back into the business. So it's going to come through the solution, but it's all fundamentally about this sort of loop of solution and distribution together. Now, a lot of product teams, and I certainly saw this in lots and lots of companies, we kind of ignore this desirability bit and we ignore the promise a little bit. And where a lot of teams really get stuck is in this little space here, where we're stuck in this thing of what can we have? When can we have it? And there's like a loop here which sucks us all down into like a whirlpool of, but when can we have more stuff? We want to build stuff. Can you build stuff? And the engineers and the designers and everyone gets sucked into this kind of how do we build that stuff? How do we make it happen? Let's let's take that away for now and imagine that instead we're going to look at the whole loop. What we're aiming to get to, I think, is a promise that's desirable, which reaches a long way into the market. So we've got this promise which the market gets and wants. And so they want to give a lot of money into the business. And for the business, they have built enough of a feasible solution and they've got the systems and the organization to make it worth it. So we've built something that is really, really scaled, really big, and it's working. And we want to fill up all of this space with our idea. But we don't start there. When you've got a brand new product, you're going to have to start really small. And that's the kernel that we're going to get to here. And there's already a clue here, which is what this kernel might be. And so we're starting really tiny, and the kernel is there's a promise from the business. And it's really small at this point, and it only touches a little bit of the market. And this bit of the market that's nearest here, we're able to say those are the people who they've got the most pressing need. They're the fanatics who will put up with a fairly janky solution because at the early days, it's not going to be massively easy to understand. They get it enough here, so they get it enough to want to suffer it, but it doesn't need to be the best, most usable thing in the world because these people are fanatics. They really, really need it. If we can't find them, we're going to struggle. So they get it enough and they want it enough to send money through the business. And then we know how to do this, not at scale yet, but we know how to do this for one or two people. That's where we're starting. And that is also worth it for the business. So making this promise is something that our customers get and want enough that they'll pay us enough money that it's worth it for us to keep investing in this. That's where your product starts. And so that gives us a place to begin. That's the kernel of the snowflake that we're going to build, or snowflake we're going to work on. We're making a promise that the market gets and wants enough. And so what we're really going to focus on is this idea of a promise. Now, with the Snowflake method for fiction, that's where you start with the like a one sentence blurb for what this book is really about. And that's what we're trying to look for with this promise as well. And this is in contrast to a lot of ways I think that I've seen and I've been involved in working when we get into designing products, digital products, because it's pretty unbounded, because a digital product has no edges and can be as big or as small as you like. What we end up with is just a huge, wild idea. This is going to be everything to everybody. And what we look at is this sense of in the future, in 3 years, 5 years' time, when this is a huge, successful product, we can see the potential. We can see how exciting it's going to be. It's going to have all the features. It's going to change the world. And we set this sort of vision that's off in the future. Really tempting. And I'm not saying it's a wrong thing to do, but it is it can be a bit of a trap because it traps us in looking at this future state and we stop thinking about, well, what does one person get from it today when we don't have anything? How are we going to start by getting one person involved? And that's what we're trying to do in this Snowflake method is say, well, what is a promise that we could make that would get one person to understand this well enough, to want it enough to give us some money? So this is the initial layer of the snowflake that we're making here. Now, we can then extend this one layer out there, right? Gosh. So what we're going to have is this moving outwards in layers as we work. So we're starting with this layer where there's a promise going to the market and there is signal coming back from the market. There's something here like a yes signal. So this can be very, very simple. We need a promise that's clear enough and clean enough to cut through the noise for a few people. And the yes signal is the willingness to spend some time or ideally some money with us to figure that out in more detail. That's the core layer. And what we're doing here is we've got internally, we're thinking about making the promise, and the market is then responding to that promise. As you move out in the layers, uh, and I'm going to say now, this is something that I'm kind of figuring out a little bit on the fly. I've been thinking about this for many years, but this is a rough cut of where this is going. And I'll say at this point now, I'm looking for feedback. I'm looking for your sort of take on this because it's not right where it is, but it's coming together over time. There's a layer out where what we're going to look at is now we're going to focus on the market. So we're going to go in and out as we move through these layers. Now, in order for the market to say yes, there's some key actions they need to do. So they need to find us, find it, find the promise. They need to come across it. They need to choose it, as in say, yep, that's something that I will choose to put some effort into. They need, and that choose it is when they're going to give us that signal. They then need to use it or follow whatever the process is, whatever the method is that we're suggesting in order to get the value. So they're going to get the value. And that then completes the promise. So we've got some activities here that our customer needs to do in order for this promise to pay off and for the thing to be worth it for our customer and for us. And I think these are the absolute core activities. What we can then do is start to break them down into more sections. So in order to find it, we're thinking about things like, well, what channels? So now we're thinking about what we can do as an action as a company. We need to think about channels. We need to think about messaging. We need to think about where next. So how do they come across us? Where do they go next? And then what does it mean for them to choose it? How are they going to take that first step? How are they going to make contact? How are they going to get started? What sort of do we need them to sign up with contact details? Do we want to get on a call with them? What sort of thing are we going to do here? There's some choices we're going to make here, and we're starting to flesh out. I hope you can see a little bit about what the level underneath means in practical steps. So they get started, and at that point, then they're going to do action one, action two, and there's some actions that we need our customer to do in order to get the value. So let's say there's 3 actions that we need them to make, and then the value they get is some sort of progress with there. And then what we're doing here is building this all as nice loops, which hopefully then goes into there. Then they do things like reinvest, come back to use it more, refer to others, review, which then feeds back into our channels, messaging, all that sort of stuff. So we've got this sort of layer here. So at the moment, all of this, let's see if I can shift this layer down. No, don't seem to be able to. Fine. All of this is in the customer's side of things. So that's customer. Now let's go to something more internal. So as we flip back into internally, we're thinking then, well, how do we get to these channels? So what's our sort of, I mean, this is partly us, but the channels, the messaging, I think we could see this better. So really, actually, let's fix that. My bad. So I'm thinking about this. This we want to think about from the customer's perspective. So here's the question we're asking. Where are they when they have the need, when they have this biggest need? And what are they saying or asking or looking for? How do they describe it? And then where they need to go next, and that's how they make contact. So then when we flip into us, now we're thinking about, okay, what channels do we have access to? What messaging, what information or content do we need to be putting out there? How are we going to get this message across? And then what's the mechanism? So like landing page or squeeze page. And then we're into sort of this is where we start thinking about like the technical terms of growth or conversion rate or product marketing, that sort of thing. We're thinking, how are we going to get people through to the point where they're ready to get started? Do they get on an email list? And all of this we can make super complicated or we can make super simple. And what I'm saying is we want to start with making this as simple as possible and think about doing this for one person. And this can then be, yeah, we'll get to that. So if we do it for one person, this doesn't need to be all automated and well thought through at this point. What we're trying to do is say, for this promise, we need a signal. And we're going to make this really simple as possible. We think we know where people are, so we're going to go to those channels. We think we know what they're looking for, what their struggle is right now. And this relates to actually one of the most, I think, critical cards from Innovation Tactics, which is available. I'll put the link somewhere with the video, but it's a card about solve for distribution, which really gets at this issue of there is the solution, the product story, and there is the distribution story. And we're looking at these, that there's kind of these two sides, and this is all there in terms of like what's inside of the company and what's outside of the company is all still in this kind of shown in this diagram as well. So this is all stuff that's happening in the market, and this is stuff that's happening inside the business. So in the market, this is where your customers are, the channels and the mechanisms we're putting out there. What we're trying to do, the email list is kind of bringing people into here, but we're trying to get to the point where we're getting people started, and then the actions are going to be happening inside what we control, inside the business's software. So then we're going to be thinking about what are the tasks, the task level steps that someone is doing. And now I'm going to tip part of the hand as well, which is this story you can lay out around this cycle here as a user story map. And a user story map, if you don't know it, or a multiverse map, which is my sort of building on that, is it's a series of tasks. that are laid out in a sequence where our user needs to do this, then do that, then do that, then do that, then do that, etc., etc. It can be much more complicated than that. We can layer in lots of extra sort of information, but typically we'll have these yellow little story map cards, and then what we'll be able to do is chunk those into larger sections, which are activities. And these are showing the next level up. So we're showing these next level up things here, which are find it, choose it, use it, get the value, or there could be some of these action things here. When we get to the task level, we're breaking it down into detail. And then the top level of a user story map, or what I call human story map in the deck, we've got the person and effectively the promise, the thing that they're trying to get done, their purpose, person and purpose. And the promise is what we're giving them to meet their purpose. So we kind of have the pink level is in here. And as we work outwards through the sections, we then get to the yellow level around here. We got to the task level there. So we can put this user story map in a concentric sort of circle and make our snowflake like this. And every layer we go out, we're able to get more and more detailed, give more and more richness to the story. But we're still always considering the market side and the business side. We need to complete the whole loop, not just focus on, and this is where a lot of teams will go, I think, is they'll just focus in on what are these things that we need the user to do? Maybe get into this, which is all this sort of onboarding. How do we get somebody started and get them taking action? And we only focus on this bit. Imagine that someone else is going to deal with all of this. And then we have maybe growth teams who are dealing with this kind of reviews and referrals and stuff like that. So I think that is where it becomes everything gets disjointed and we start seeing cracks coming in between these where it doesn't all link up anymore. It's not coherent anymore because we think we're doing various different things. Another key aspect that makes this incoherent, because at this point, you'll notice we haven't got to anything that looks anything like a screen design or a software architecture or anything like this. At this point, we are mapping what is the business process that we're doing here. And another idea that is helpful to consider at this point is a concept from Amy Hoy, which is that any business has these three layers. Layer one is the opportunity. Layer two is the method. Layer three is the format. Now, the opportunity, that's what we're looking at here, this core promise, this need in the market, somebody who has a problem, a struggle, something that they want to make progress with. They've tried something already, but that wasn't good enough. So they're still looking, they're still not satisfied, and they're looking for something more. And so the opportunity is for us to give them that something more. Now, there are many ways that that something more could be met at any stage. It could be a physical thing, it could be a digital thing, it could be information, it could be assistance, it could be a service. There's all sorts of ways to meet any need. We're going to choose the method that we think is going to meet that opportunity. And that's what we're laying out then. We're saying, well, there's a method that we're going to go through, and these are the things that we need our customers to do in order for them to make this progress that they need to make. And we're going to do some stuff as well. So as we shift through here at the task level, we're then seeing what we will do to support these actions that are happening here. And this is what we're then going to build into the software and make screens about and all that sort of stuff. But there's also some of this is what we're going to do. We're going to build certain ways for people to start interacting with this stuff. So there we're getting into the method, but we're also very quickly likely to get tied up in format as well. And we're going to be assuming the format first. And the format is, well, it could be an app, or it's a series of web pages. We're going to design it in Figma and we're going to write it in code. And that's what we're going to do. And it's going to be, for a while, it has to be a website, then it has to be an app. Now, in the current zeitgeist, it has to be AI. But what we tend to do, and the risk that we're trying to avoid by starting with the core here, is we tend to get overly concerned with we need format X. And then we go casting around for what are the methods that we could do with format X. And then we hope that there's an opportunity that they meet. And that's not wrong. Like you can do that. And some of the time you're going to luck out. But you're very likely to, by starting with a format, to constrain the kind of methods you can consider and to constrain the opportunities you can even perceive. And so it is helpful, I think, to maybe start with this format, start by saying, hey, yeah, we want to use AI for something. Now we think there's a promise, and we start maybe by thinking there's this big picture, just like you would if you were writing a novel. You're going to have that idea in your mind of this big picture of the novel and the sweeping scope and some scenes that you want to have in there and actions you want the characters to do. You know you want to write a scene where someone's jumping out of an airplane or whatever it is. And you know that you want to have some like cool AI stuff going on. But what you're going to do then is use a method like the Snowflake method to help you to structure the way that you think about how this builds up over time. So you're never letting go of the fact that, sure, you want to get to AI at some point, the format that you want to get to, but you have to also consider these other layers too. So we're saying, okay, big AI level, someone's jumping out of a plane, it's all very exciting, marvelous. But let's get down to this core promise first. What's going to make somebody over in the market go, oh yeah, that's something I'm interested in. Let's figure that out first. So, and that's the way that we're thinking through when we're using something like the Snowflake model. We can start with this promise layer and test. We can just check right now today. Well, if we put that promise out there, do we get a signal back that the market is saying, yes, actually, that is a promise that we're interested in, which suggests that there's an opportunity there. So the opportunity is kind of that pink layer of the promise and the signal that comes back. Then we've got the next layer is, okay, so in order for this to work for us, the business, and for our customers, we're going to need customers to find it, choose it, use it, and get the value. That's going to involve using a method. Now, we can try that method before we've built the format. And this is another card from Innovation Tactics. It's a card called Be the Algorithm. So there's a couple of things we can use here. There is Be the Algorithm to help you to support the right-hand side of the diagram here, where we're actually delivering the value. And there's something called Language Market Fit, which is all about figuring out the left-hand side of the diagram, where it's in the market. Does this promise work? Can we get people to come and sign up to check out what we've got? Then can we take them through our method when the method is just an operating procedure, a list of instructions, not fully coded up yet? We're not going to do that for hundreds of people, obviously. But what we always find is that as we go out of this snowflake layers, we learn things at each layer that mean we revise what we think the layer inside is. So as we go from this core inner layer where we've done what I'd call a recruitment probe from Innovation Tactics, where we've made a promise and we've seen, will people spend time with us to talk about that as a fundamental idea? From there, we're then going to go to the next layer out. And as we then test language market fit and see if we can get people to sign up, and then test delivering the value, what we'll often find is actually we were wrong about a bunch of stuff. There is a load of detail in reality that we weren't anticipating. And actually, the actions we thought people needed to take aren't in that order. It's not one, two, three, it's actually two, three, one. Or it's something else entirely. We forgot action four that was absolutely critical for them to get in there to get the thing. Or we find that actually there's something else. There's another like loop that we need to take them through, or there's all sorts of stuff that happens when you actually just start going through this process with people. And I've noticed that thinking is much harder to have happen if you jump straight into writing product requirements documents or designing screens. And that ties us back to these are the two uh, product design, I think, equivalents of the pantser and the plotter. The pantser is your classic designer. This was me when I started as design. Absolutely. I would get the brief and sort of think through the brief, and then I'd have a load of stuff in my head, and then I'd just start making screens. And I would make fully beautifully rendered screens, absolutely designed to a T, trying to do it all at once and put these screens out and start laying out these sequences of screens. And that's really pantsering it. I was telling a story linearly as I went through this process, but putting all of the detail in all of the time. And that was fine. Sometimes it worked well, but more of the time, what I'd find is I'd get some like critical things actually quite wrong. And what I would then need to do is go back and redo the entire thing from scratch because I'd done so much. I'd gummed myself up in so many ways, painted myself into so many corners that there was no way to quickly edit these and fix these big problems without just starting again from scratch. And I remember that as a classic thing in the agency days would be working on the problem linearly, doing the whole screen design, everything like that for a week, and then on the last day before it was time to ship, going, oh no, now I know what it needs to be actually, and having to go back and start again and just do the whole thing overnight. And it wasn't great. So I learned better fairly quickly, and I started to find ways to structure it. Now the other extreme is the plotter. And the plotter is the writing of the product requirements documents and is going around and collecting business requirements and getting these high level beats for what people think it is that need to happen. And the challenge with that is there's often gaps or inconsistencies. And when you get to the details of things, you realize that you actually can't join up plot point 4 to plot point 5. There's something that's missing from within this. And when you start to pull on that thread, more falls apart. And so, again, neither of those are wrong. They can work, and they might be the easiest way to work in your context. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying that there are alternatives. It is not just build it all from scratch and design all the screens perfectly on the first go. And it's not just write product requirements documents and get those really nice and really good and understand all the requirements well so that you can estimate things. What I've noticed when working in more of a snowflake way is that we revise what we think we're even doing much more readily because we are making it real without writing code. We're making it real in the sense of we're working with real human behavior in the real world. Because going back to that fundamental belief, your success depends on the behaviors of people and systems that are outside of your control. And so, what we do with the Snowflake method for product design is we start with those behaviors. We don't start with the stuff that's relatively comfortable for us to do. It's not easy, like writing code and doing screen design. I'm not saying that's easy, but it's easier than the facing the uncertainty and the ambiguity and the lack of control we have over other people. So that's starting to lay this out. We have got this level where we're looking at the sort of user story map of it. So that makes too much disappear. So once we get through the user story map level, what I then tend to do quite commonly, and this is taking a leaf out of Erica Hall's book, is start writing the conversation layer. So now instead of just the tasks, we're going to write out the conversation that the user is having with the business. So we're kind of linking these two things together, but in more detail. The task level is about what they see and what they do, etc., etc. Now let's flesh that out. And what we're doing here is we're starting to write the wording, starting to write the copy. So we can write the copy for, okay, so what is the messaging? They needed to see such and such a message. So we're going to flesh this out. So we start writing out do this big conversation layer. Now, what's lovely with the conversation layer is you've got writing in documents, in some sort of document form. Now, while when we're testing the sort of way that it works, we can role play or improvise our way through it. We can be pretend to be the algorithm. You might have heard that was Wizard of Oz testing. We're in this green zone. When we get out to the conversation layer, we have understood enough about what it is that people need to do and we need people to do, what it is that's going to start to make this thing work. We've understood more about it. So now we can start to flesh that out and we can start to get the wording, the copy right so that it feels good, flows well, etc., etc. What I tend to do is actually literally test just this writing, a Word document or on a printout with people, get potential users, potential customers, potentially people from our sign up list because we've got people interested in this from the landing page. And I'll just get them to read it out to me and tell them what they think it is and make sense of it. And this way you get to then check, does it still make sense now we've fleshed it out? Is there stuff we're missing from the copy? Are there places where it doesn't make sense, when they don't get it, or when it doesn't trigger with what they wanted in the same way, and we're missing something from when we were doing it in a more human sense. What we're trying to do is find how can we automate the human behaviors that we were doing to support our customers getting through it. From that conversation layer, we're then going to end up with some lovely copy. We now have quite a lot of structure. We've got copy, we've got the task sequence. As soon as we understand this task sequence really well, guess what we can do? Developers can start structuring what this code needs to be, and they can start testing the other side of the picture, which is the systems that are outside our control. So then we're going to look at the other side. So this is more on our business and our supply side. What are the systems we need to worry about? Whereas the conversation layer, that's more on the demand side. That's more about our users and our customers. How are we having that conversation across this divide, across this business market divide? In terms of the systems, we're then looking at like the flip side of it. So on a user story map, we typically treat this as sea level. So we're zooming into the user story map layer, which is now very, very messy, but we're back in here. As we go downwards here, we're looking more at the systems. And as we go upward here, we're looking more at the conversation layer. So we're starting to sort of flesh that out. What we can then start to do is this all, so as the developers look into the systems and do something like a walking skeleton, so make the whole thing work end to end with just one piece of data, they will start to understand where there are problems, hidden complexity that we didn't understand in the way we're building this system, which can then influence how we change the conversation, which influences what these actions are, which influences how people are going to use it to get the value, which influences the promise that we make and the way that the customers are going to see it. So we can revise each of these inner layers every time we add more detail. And we're getting progressively, iteratively more wrinkly, more detailed, closer to reality. Now, all of this sounds like a lot, but because each stage has relatively too few chunks in it, we can do this incredibly quickly. Like making the task level story can happen in 45 minutes or less. Uh, Figuring out this promise, we then get into some other interesting ideas about being able to create options, and that's something for another video, another time. But as we start to flesh these out, each of these layers doesn't take that long. And what enables us to do is get the maximum speed to signal or maximum speed to learning, the maximum speed to being able to get signals about what it is that we need to do. Often, this is another really common thing I see with product teams and with companies in general, is they think we must build it so that we can ship it, so that then we can measure it and then we can learn. And that is one way to go about it. I'm not going to say it's wrong. It is a way that companies have operated, and some of them have been successful with it. Many have not. What I will say is build it so you can then measure and then learn is incredibly expensive. Like it's playing it on hard mode to some degree, to a large degree. And one of the other issues you have is once you've built it, What if you can't get customers to come in and use it? Now, that's something where you think, oh, yeah, yeah, when we build it, they will come. We know not to think that, and yet still, there tends to be this sense of we're going to need to build it before, obviously, before we can share it with any customers. So hopefully, with this, I'm showing a bit of a hint of actually, no, you can start serving customers before you've written a lick of code, before you've made a screen of design. You don't need any of that stuff. What you need is a promise that your customer is going to be able to make progress with something they're struggling with. Now, you may need more complicated stuff to get people through the door. And certainly, as you start to scale this, absolutely, you are going to need to write that code. But what this Snowflake method enables you to do is figure out exactly the right code to write, to automate exactly the right things so that you are able to create this repeatable process of value. And so it's as we move out here, finally, you're going to be able to do your screen designs. You're going to be fleshing out your marketing processes, processes, and you're going to be coding. And ideally, you do this all together. So sort of code it all and figure that all out together. But you can also do it in a more like waterfall way with handoffs and stuff like that, if it makes sense. The reason you will be able to do that with more confidence now is because through working outwards, you have now iteratively tested the core concept and all of the actions and all of the conversation layer and everything else. You've tested that iteratively with real customers who are really from the market so that you now have built confidence that this actually does work, that the opportunity that you identified and the method you identified is worth developing into this format, which you're just seeing at the end there. So what we saw as we layered out the Snowflake model was we started to understand a sense of the user needs. That promise and the signal is based on the user needs. And what we're really making with the promise and the signal is this product and service strategy. What is the thing that we're offering that we think is going to be worth it for us, that we think customers are going to want enough to do it? The next layer out we're getting is the conceptual model. We're starting to play with the things that customers actually want to do and the language that we're using, the relationships between different sort of the objects that we want to do stuff with. We can break that down in a lot more detail as well. But we're doing the simplest possible version of that layer. As we come out, we're then looking at the task level and we're looking at the conversation. And this is the structure of how the interaction is happening underneath the surface, because it is all about that conversation and the thought sequences we're working on. And then finally, we're going to add that surface layer. And at each stage, as we work up this stack, what we're doing is making it more explicit. We're making it clear what this thing is, and we're sharing it with our team. We're building it together, so it's no longer in somebody's head. These three layers hidden in somebody's head, and then they're expressing it with a surface that then other people see from a different angle and misunderstand. When we get that, that's when you get the code is written differently, or people don't understand what it is and they don't want to invest in it because they don't see that this is a thing that could work. It doesn't make sense to them. Whereas if we've started from the strategy level and we've shown, well, actually there is need and people are willing to pay for it, that's a signal that can trigger more investment and can trigger us to figure out, well, how can we do this? Can we do this in a way that is going to be worth it for us? Ah, we can. Okay. Now, can we start to automate that by layering on this conversation? Ah, we can. Okay. And look, it makes sense. We've gone through this with more customers and they're now understanding the way that this conversation flows really well. It's getting easier for us to express the value. One of the common things that you see when working in the Snowflake method is that our processes actually get simpler. We realize that we can take stuff out. There's a bunch of stuff that we thought we were going to need that it turns out that we don't need. And there are also things that we didn't realize we were going to need that we do find out that we need. But we're finding out early before we've invested too much, before we've built a load of software, which means it's easy to change when those things happen. And it's easy for us to actually say, do you know what? The balance now is not working out. We don't think we can get people to pay enough to make it worth the amount of effort it's going to take us to do this thing. So we need to think about how we can reshift that or do something different. So with that, that is my uh, attempt as a fairly quick introduction to this rough sketch of the Snowflake method. I want to give a quick shout out to Christina Vodke because this is something I tweeted about a few years ago, and Christina encouraged me at that point to think through it more and put something together. And I tried writing something, but it was just struggling to come out. So this video becomes my first way of sharing it in a more considered way. So I really want to know what you make of this. Did this make sense to you? How did you have you used something like this in the past? At the moment, do you identify as a pantser or a plotter, or do you have something else? I think there's definitely resonances here with the method I'm sharing here, with concepts from say ShapeUp, from Basecamp, and with countless other methods. Um, so I'm not saying this is again, as I say at the start, this is not like particularly special. This isn't the right way to do product work. And it may be that attempting to work in this way, trying to pull it towards this as an idealistic way, is not something you can do in your organization. What I can say is there are definitely ideas from this that you can apply in your organization that might help you to find the way to be a little bit more adaptive, to get your speed to signal down rather than having to build a whole thing for months before you can get any signal at all, and potentially building and not being able to get any signal because perhaps you don't get any customers. That's what I want to avoid for you. So, again, let me know how you got on with this. And I thank you very much for paying so much attention.